Yes, I had a teacher called Mrs. Owen, actually, and she was very strict with me when I was growing up. So Mrs. Owen, I promise to behave today. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you very much to the Institute and to Jill and other members of the Institute for giving me the honour today to speak to you on this, what I think is an important topic for Europe as a whole and certainly European law enforcement. As Nora said, I'm the new Director of Europol, and I have the honour, therefore, to lead an agency that we think is pioneering a new response to organised crime and terrorism in Europe. And in particular, we're using the power of criminal information and our operational capabilities to track the activities of the most dangerous organised crime groups in Europe, to monitor the development of new organised crime techniques, and to help, most importantly of all, to help law enforcement services have the maximum impact on organised crime in this part of the world. And I'd like to, over the next 15 minutes, talk to you about how we see from our Central European overview how the organised crime dynamic is changing, how it's becoming more difficult to police, and what the EU's response to that is at the moment, including the response of the European Police Office. So, first a reflection on the new threats posed by organised crime. Of course, now we live in a new global society, freedom of movement for the half billion EU citizens, enterprising business culture that we have in Europe now, of course, and the convenience that we all enjoy of online shopping and banking. But of course, the benefits of this global society offer opportunities for criminal exploitation. In particular, that the easier, quicker cross-border travel and communication patterns that are available to all of us are, of course, at the same time exploited by the criminal. And with 1 billion people crossing the external border of the European Union every year, and with unrestrained access within, this is clearly a very positive and lucrative environment for criminals to operate. The half billion people that live in Europe themselves are a very lucrative consumer society and a base for these criminal activities. But also, of course, the criminals these days have the power to directly target the citizen, in particular through the misuse of the internet. I guess now we have almost every business and over half of all homes are dependent on the internet. There is a significant increase in particular in online data storage, which has led in the last 2 or 3 years to unparalleled opportunities for identity theft. And just to use another example of the power of the internet, we have currently in Europe over 1,500 internet sites alone hosting child abuse material. Now, the modern characteristics of the organised crime group, I think they're becoming more difficult to police, as I say. And what we're seeing is a mix of the old and the new patterns in these organised crime groups. The new bit is that they're flexible, more dynamic, much more multinational in their activity than ever before. When European police services were dealing with the first wave of international cocaine trafficking from South America 20 years ago, we were dealing then with fairly large monolithic pyramid structures of the so-called Medellin and Cali drug cartels. These were fairly easy to identify. They operated as kind of old-fashioned business structures. And in the end, the excellent work of the Colombian forces in particular were dismantled rather successfully. That model doesn't apply anymore, not only in the field of cocaine trafficking, but in no form of organised crime as far as we can see. What we have now are smaller cellular-like structures of business-like organised crime groups, forming and reforming across national boundaries, across ethnic boundaries, mixing their illicit activities with the legitimate economy, and operating, as I said, across borders without impunity, exploiting in particular the unregulated access to certain markets around the world. Diversifying the services as well, whereas in the past we had drug groups just involved in drugs. Now we have a majority of the most prominent organised crime groups mixing their services, diversifying their talents across organised crime and the terrorist agenda as well. But they still have old characteristics as well. They're certainly not. They're certainly still capable of using traditional powers of violence and corruption to sustain their will over large sections of the population, and certainly in corrupting governments in many parts of the world. The other problem I think that we have with organised crime these days is that they're not easily seen or reached by the police community. As I said, they're already hidden to a certain extent in the legitimate economy. They're operating, I think, in some cases below the radar of national police priorities. I use the example of what we call mass marketing fraud. And there are many millions of people who have been the victims online of so-called lottery scams. Congratulations, you've won the lottery, which is surprising because you didn't even know that you entered it. And to claim your prize of €50,000, please submit immediately a remittance of $20 or €20 to claim it. And a surprising number of victims that fall for this scam, which has generated a multi-million-pound systematically organised criminal agenda in many parts of Europe. It's not a national police priority because in each case you have single victims who may not even take it to the local police station, and if they do, of course, it's only €20. Why should I bother? What we are starting to uncover, as I said, is that this is an organised crime enterprise, a structured attack on the most vulnerable sections of the community in particular, and generating, as I said, a very large amount of profit. Not easily seen or reached also in the sense that some aspects of modern organised crime group operate in inaccessible jurisdictions. Geographically, in some cases, we have now the new old threat of piracy in parts of the world, across East Africa, for example. Very, very difficult area for any kind of police intervention. But more than just geographically, if you take the threat from cybercrime, this is perhaps the best example of transnational crime operating across national boundaries, not in any single jurisdiction at any one time. There's no global cybercrime police force. There's no global cybercrime legislation. And in this area in particular, we have organised crime groups quickly developing their criminal business model, developing e-crime tools, hacking, Trojans and viruses, so-called botnets that I still struggle to understand 6 months into my job, hacking, all the tools, modern tools that you need to operate criminality across the internet. With these tools, they deploy them then in particular for large-scale identity theft. And based on that, creating, therefore, of course, false identities from which they commit online fraud, not just on individuals by stealing their banking details, but, of course, on governments and treasury departments around the world. Multi-billion pounds worth of fraud committed on the exchequer of many European governments alone. And then, to complete the cycle, the proceeds from this cybercrime are money laundered also online now to make it even harder for police activities to track them down. So this concept, rather new concept of online money laundering in what seems to be now an underground economy operating across the internet. In Europe, also what we see, I think, is the development of a number of strategic hubs within the European Union that operate as key nexus points for criminality. And at Europol, we've identified more or less 5. In the northwest of Europe, which of course includes Ireland, the importance of Holland in particular, of course, as a major regional hub for the distribution of drugs and many other forms of crime, as an entrepot community for business criminals to meet and to exchange not just their goods and money, but their best practices. In the northeast of Europe, around the Baltic states, where Russian criminality in particular features. In the southeast of Europe, Balkans in particular, and Turkey, strategic centre points for the flow of heroin and, in certain cases, illegal immigrants into Europe. In the Mediterranean basin, and here North Africa is a growing problem for the flow of migrants in particular. And finally, in the southwest around Spain and Portugal, which has traditionally been the major entry point for cocaine and a certain amount of money laundering from South America. And also, I think what we find in these hubs are not just business centres, but also opportunities for cross-ethnic cooperation. We have domestic organised crime groups within the hubs themselves, acting as gatekeepers, if you like, with a fairly low profile. But then other groups from outside the region with more aggressive intentions to seize and control the markets themselves. So organised crime groups infiltrating, exploiting their own ethnic communities, expatriate ethnic communities, in Dublin, in London, in other major cities, becoming points of reference for that communities by exerting through the power of violence, exerting their will over that ethnic community. Talking about Albanians, about Turks, about Colombians, about Russians to a certain extent, about the growing rise of Vietnamese organised crime activity around Europe in particular. And in their ethnic communities, and sometimes even outside, also being involved for the trafficking of illegal immigrants for the purposes of sexual exploitation and also labour exploitation to sustain, therefore, their grip on that community. They're involved in racketeering and extortion. They're involved also in controlling alternative remittance systems, online banking, the Hawala system for certain Asian groups, and so on. Now, these hubs, therefore, are the focus of increased attention, not just by my agency, but major European law enforcement agencies. And what we see, of course, is the connection between the inside and outside world in the EU. That these hubs, in turn, are fed by certain markets and certain strategic points outside the European Union. The impact of Dubai, for example, on the flow of money through Holland to Ireland and the United Kingdom. I've already mentioned Russia, West Africa, and so on. So this is becoming quite a sophisticated, difficult threat for us to manage. And what we call for at the European level is therefore a much smarter response, a focus in particular on these criminal hubs, so that in particular I think we have the means by which regional priorities or EU priorities can also be reflected in the national programmes that member states have to fight organised crime. And that, frankly, we should work more together than apart to systematically dismantle these organised crime groups. So this is about, therefore, the need for greater international cooperation, in particular to attack the main criminal networks that have set up their business in these and other locations. This is about identifying the networks in the first place, of course, identifying their links with other strategic centres, as well as the external feeder markets that I talked about, and concentrating operational action against the top 100 criminal networks, for example, that are operating in Europe today. The picture we have of current efforts to cooperate, to collaborate international efforts across Europe is pretty mixed, frankly. And if we're to defeat this growing menace in the future, then the cooperation levels have to improve. Indeed, I would say that we need to move from the concept of cooperation to integration in the future. That's not to say that I'm in favour of Europol becoming a European FBI, which is what most journalists ask me as soon as they meet me. I don't believe in that, but I do believe that we can work much more closely together than is the case at the moment. We start with the integration of our knowledge, and this is perhaps the key to a better, smarter response. We learn more in order to act with more impact against the groups involved. We don't know today who the top 100 criminal groups are active in Europe, for example. We don't know enough about how organised crime practices in some of the areas that are talked about are working, are evolving, and that's because our knowledge picture is incomplete. So this is about knowledge sharing. It's not that there isn't enough data already available. There is. National police agencies, the private sector, other EU bodies together already hold significant amount of data, already hold the knowledge, I believe, that we require. It's just that it is not systematically exchanged and organised in an effective way. And I think that the future belongs to this in particular, information exchange and the power that national authorities and law enforcement institutions have to use sophisticated software tools to data match across large bulk volume data systems in order to identify criminal trends that are not available to the naked eye. As we do that, we need to retain in particular the public confidence levels in our police authorities. It's not that we should be given now unrestrained access to collect whatever data we want. We can make the argument for that, but only providing we retain public legitimacy by doing it in a way that is transparent and offers full accountability within our political process especially. And in terms of work at the EU level, what's particularly important for many people that I speak around Europe, parliamentarians and others, is the need for strong data protection to preserve the rights of access for individuals. And at Europol, I can say I've never worked within an agency that has such a robust data protection regime. And the first few weeks to me that was a bit of a culture shock. And to some detectives, for example, it frankly is something that is difficult to manage, particularly when you have the eye on the goal of securing a quick operational result. But now I know it's a positive strength of our organisation because it allows us to demonstrate the accountability arrangements that we have and that we can maintain, therefore, high levels of public legitimacy. Knowledge sharing is very important. From that, we can have an integration of our operational effort, joint operations against a common target list, which leading to joint judicial action. I think as we also exchange more and learn more about the threat, we can begin to attack it in a smarter way. I think we need to better identify what one could term the critical infrastructure of organised crime. Yes, it's adaptable and flexible. Yes, it's difficult to track down, but it too has its vulnerabilities. The fact that it uses the internet so much for its communication leaves a trail for police to pick up. Similarly, in the flows of illegal money through the banking system. These are its vulnerability points. And I think it's possible for national authorities and police agencies to track that down and hit the criminals where they would most feel it. And in particular in regard to financial crime, which is being debated today, I think this holds much promise for us. I think we could be smarter as well in pursuing a strategy that links law enforcement measures with non-traditional law enforcement measures. So the so-called prevention agenda, working with a wider set of government and non-governmental parties, with industry, for example, with the media even, to raise the threat level, at least, that criminals face. In the end, then, I think this is also about an integration of our values. That we should pursue common values of leadership to begin with, the courage and imagination to design a better future model. And this is a shared responsibility of police chiefs and ministers in particular to make the case for better international cooperation and to promote in particular a more open culture of cooperation. It's about common values around legitimacy, as I already talked about, and of course around learning, that we should use evidence-based research to develop police activities in this area to a more effective standard. In my experience, we are often chasing the game that the criminals have adapted before we have. And I think, therefore, somehow we need to be smarter in our response. In the EU, what do I observe? Well, again, a mixed bag of good and not so good. Across Europe, the policing culture is traditionally a conservative one. Of course, it's in most societies, policing agencies have developed over many, many years, in some cases over 100 years. And there is a culture of protecting information in particular. And from my own personal experience, I understand fully the need to do that. But as I said, if we are to be more successful, we need to bridge this gap between a certain natural caution, take a leap of faith, and to share it on a more systematic basis in order to be jointly better successful. I also think that we suffer a little bit from what is a lack of uniformity in the policing response across Europe, different structures that have evolved, of course different judicial systems already, and also different methodologies in approaching organised crime. Having said that, the EU clearly is one of probably the most politically and economically integrated regions in the world, with already very strong measures also in this area from which we directly benefit. And we shouldn't underestimate the impact that the EU already has had in this area. The European arrest warrant, for example, has transformed a part of police work over the last 8 years or so, and it's being used now on a systematic basis to much better support police activity. And I think the evolution of organisations like Europol also is a step forward, of course, in promoting better cooperation. We could be better integrated, I think. There is at the moment no strategic coherence, perhaps, to the EU's effort in this area. That might change if the Lisbon Treaty gets past the vote of one single remaining person. And if it does, I think, therefore, we will have a structure for the first time under what's called COSI, under an article of the Lisbon Treaty, that would better align the strategic efforts of EU agencies and the member states as well. We have the opportunity to promote a common methodology. Europol is pioneering the European Criminal Intelligence Model, which in particular reinforces this point about being knowledge-led in our work. So a more systematic gathering of intelligence in the right areas so that we can produce a well-informed annual statement of the organised crime threat, and from that based a programme of concerted attack on the most dangerous groups. So there are reasons to be cheerful, I think, as we move forward. And I recognise that Europol has some role to play in that, and that there is some expectation now on our agency that we would do that. We held a meeting of Ministers of Justice and Home Affairs at Europol 2 weeks ago, the first time in our history that we had such an important meeting to discuss the future of European policing and Europol's role within that. There is clearly a very strong political appetite in every member state for now a much better performance in this area, and a clear political will, at least, that more information will be exchanged through these channels, and there will be a closer integration of operational effort. And for Europol, we stand, I think, at the cusp of a new chapter, at least in our story. We celebrated a few months ago our 10th formal anniversary following the signing of the Europol Convention in 1999. On the 1st of January, now just a few weeks away, we transform our status and our capability. We become for the first time a formal EU agency under a new legal framework, and we acquire new capabilities, again in particular to collect and store information and to work with a broader range of partners, including for the first time the private sector. So it feels like the dawn of a new age, perhaps, for Europol. It's my, of course, responsibility as the new director to try and achieve at least some of those expectations in that political ambition. We do 2 or 3 main things. Firstly, we act as an information broker, perhaps the EU's criminal information hub. Our legal mandate gives us a unique capability to collect so much private data, and that's because of the data protection regime that is also already established. So we have in our databases already literally millions and millions of data across the whole spectrum of the most serious forms of crime and terrorism. These are manipulated by sophisticated software tools. They are analysed. This data is analysed by over 100 analysts that are currently part of my organisation. And from that, we are able to support over 8,000 complex cases against criminal and terrorist networks each year. And this also allows us to develop a certain degree of specialist capability that is unmatched in the EU. We are 600 officers from every major law enforcement agency in Europe, and therefore a breadth of knowledge that, as I said, is unrivaled in every field of crime. Our success, I think, our future belongs in promoting better operational success. I would like to see that figure of 8,000 doubled in the next few years, and I would like to see our being involved much more in more cases on the front line supporting member states, including Ireland, of course. Of those 8,000 cases, over 250 a year are currently initiated by Ireland, which is not a bad figure given the relative size of this country and the size of its police force. In the field of fighting money laundering especially, we are again using our information capabilities to provide a platform for the exchange of financial intelligence. Suspicious transactions, for example, which are a feature of police work against criminality in every member state now. Quite advanced systems at the national level to collect suspicious transactions. and using this as, in some cases, as the backbone for much more successful operational work. But there is yet no institutional capability to cross-match those national data systems in Europe. And into this opportunity, Europol will enter, and next year, under our new legal framework, we will establish for the first time a new information capability to systematically cross-match, therefore, this database and others in the field of money laundering, so that for the first time we can have a European overview of criminal flows of money across the continent. And let's face it, in this area, it's unlikely that any of these major money laundering operations are going to stop at the borders of Ireland or the UK or any other member state. It is, by its very nature, international in its activity. We have major analytical projects at the moment in the field of money laundering, including in regard to missing trader intra-community fraud, which is generating billions amount of fraud each year. And following on from the best practice, and you've heard this before, I'm sure, from Ireland in creating the Criminal Assets Bureau now 13 years ago, Europol is also promoting that as best practice, or at least the principles of that, in other European countries, trying to raise, therefore, standard models of criminal assets work across Europe, and through, in particular, the establishment of our new Europol Criminal Assets Bureau, which is exactly that, a platform for more integrated effort in this area. So as we move through our transition period to becoming a new agency, try to meet these new political expectations, we have a new strategy to become the principal support centre for law enforcement operations in Europe. An enhanced 24/7 service will be developed over the next 6 months for the first time. We will have regional advisors at Europol so that we can develop, in particular, effective operational strategies to dismantle those 5 regional hubs that I talked about. We will try and take our analytical tools that are very strong more directly to the front office through the deployment of our officers alongside the national authorities. We will work with our network of Europol national units that are established in every country. We have a very effective one here in Dublin, to make sure that we realise our goals and that we can therefore give a stronger input to the front line. And we will work with partners much more strongly in the future, our EU agency partners, other global institutions like Interpol, and of course within the private sector as well, I hope. But I think our future really belongs in acting as the criminal information hub of the EU, using our privileged legal framework, our privileged information basis to be a one-stop shop for the flows of all major criminal data. And in that way, therefore, much better helping the investigator to identify links to other parts of Europe. All of these developments, I think, will make Europol stronger in the future. It will also give it, I think, a clear role within the new internal security architecture of the European Union. So, in summary then, I'd like to say that I think we need a smarter response to fight organised crime in Europe. I've talked over the last few minutes about the evolving nature of organised crime and terrorism, how it's becoming difficult to police, how the future in addressing it belongs, I think, in more integrated efforts in the international community, that we should take advantage in particular of the tools and instruments that are available within the European Union to deliver better results at the end of the day. That Europol has many assets, developing assets in this field, top specialists, a unique network of liaison officers as well, and some modern capabilities and tools. And in the future, we will use these tools within an integrated, a high-security 24/7 operational centre. I hope to dismantle some of the most dangerous criminal groups operating in Europe today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Rob.